G'day everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be doing a back to basics series, starting that off with some ribs, doing them in the Weber kettle, basically just starting off where I started out and learning how to barbecue. So I thought I'd pass that on to show you guys how you can do the same. So first off, what we're going to do is we're going to get these baby back ribs all trimmed up. Alright, so the membrane's already been taken off by some pork on these ones, so I'll just trim that back piece off. I don't really want to trim any fat off the back of this one, so we'll flip it over and then we'll trim off this big fat cap on the front here because this won't render down while cooking, so we'll get that all trimmed off. Okay, so now I've got it all trimmed up, we'll get it seasoned down. Usually I like to keep them nice and square, but the way these bones are sort of coming off on an angle, it's a bit hard to achieve that today. But first off, what we'll do is we'll get some French's mustard on, just as our binder. Don't need heaps of it, just enough to sort of make the rub tack to it. Alright, so now that's done, we'll make up a bit of a basic rub. Alright, so we'll make up our basic rub now. You can pretty much do this with salt and pepper, and you can adjust it to your taste preference, but this is just a basic one just to give it a bit of a depth of flavour. So first off, we've got 1 tablespoon of kosher salt, 1 tablespoon of coarse ground black pepper, 2 tablespoons of onion powder, 2 tablespoons of granulated garlic, 1 tablespoon of sweet paprika, and you can pretty much leave it like that. And the best thing about making your own rubs is you can customize them to your own taste preference. 1 tablespoon of Keen's mustard powder, funnels obviously aren't going to work today. And finally, 2 tablespoons of brown sugar just to give it that sweetness. So you want to try and balance your flavour so you get a little bit of sweet, a little bit of heat, and a bit of salt as well. So I'll pop that in as well. And then we can just mix it all up. And it's as easy as that, you've got your own homemade rub. So we'll get this sprinkled onto our ribs now, starting on the back side. And as you can see, it's got a nice red colour to it from that sweet paprika. You can use smoked as well, and you can add your own herbs, maybe some cumin if you're going to go like a Mexican type flavour, some coriander, or coriander seeds rather. You know, different sweeteners as well. You could try white sugar, honey powder, and beetroot powder as well to give it another depth of redness. But we're just using what most people would have in their pantry on a day-to-day basis. And as you can see, we've got enough rub left there to do another probably 1-2 racks of ribs or some wings, or yeah, you can use it in many different ways, this rub, and you can change it up by adding a few other bits and pieces to it and making a beef rub. But we'll leave it at that at the moment, let this rub settle, and then we'll get the Weber set up and start cooking. Alright, so now we're out at the smoke shack again. I'm just going to get the Weber set up. So I've got a heap of briquettes in here, my bag just split open, but I've got the old Pepco ones. What I'll do is I'll go around the outside of the Weber with them, too wide, too high. So I'll get that set up now. Now that we've got our snake set up in a relatively neat manner, I'm going to light up 12 briquettes in my chimney, and that'll be the start. So basically how this will cook is you have a heap of unlit briquettes with unlit ones around the edge, and they'll catch like a fuse all the way around, keeping it at that low temperature rather than having a heap of them in there and trying to keep them at the same temperature. So we'll get that lit up, and once they're ashed over, we'll continue on. So our briquettes are all ashed over now. So we'll put those down at the start of our snake. And now they're all in, I'll just tidy these up, make sure that fuse starts to light on the snake. And while we're waiting, we'll get our wood ready. So we've got 2 chunks of cherry and a chunk of pecan. So that's the pecan, 2 chunks of cherry. You don't need heaps of wood, so we'll get those set up. And you only want to do them probably for the first third, because meat will only take smoke for the first 2.5 hours to 3 hours. Now we'll get the top back on, or the cooking grate, the lid on, making sure the top vent is wide open, the bottom vent is closed down to 1/4, and as you can see I've just marked some gradients in there just so it's for ease of use, to know where it is rather than opening and closing it all the time. That way I can adjust the temperatures as I go along. And we'll also make sure that our thermometer is away from the heat source, so that way we're getting a better, truer reading of what the actual kettle temp is rather than directly over the coals. But we'll let that get up to temperature now for the next 10-15 minutes and put the ribs on. Right, so it's been 15 minutes. We've let that smoker preheat. We're sitting on 225 Fahrenheit at the moment. I'm aiming for a cooking temperature of 250 degrees Fahrenheit today. So we'll get these ribs popped on. And when we put them on, we want to try and keep them away from that heat source so we don't get any burn marks or anything like that. As much as we possibly can, of course. We are cooking in a smaller space than usual in the drum smoker. But as we go along and the snake burns further around, we'll move the ribs to keep them away from that heat source. But we'll close it up now, keep that temperature in, keep that smoke rolling, and we'll come and check on them in about an hour's time. Alright, so the ribs have been on for a bit over an hour now. We'll just have a quick look and see if we need to move them or spray them down. And they're looking pretty good. The bark's set nicely. Probably won't spritz them just yet, but what I might do is just rotate them, because as you can see, this end's starting to cook more so than the other side. I haven't got my gloves on, but it's just us tonight, so it'll be fine. So we'll let that keep cooking, and we'll check on this again in about an hour's time. Okay, so we're about 3.5 hours into the cook now, and I've moved it around a couple of times just to keep that heat even on it so there's no bits crisping up. And we're sitting on 165 Fahrenheit, so it's just about to get to the stall. So what I'm going to do now is get this wrapped up and then put it back into the smoker. Okay, so when I wrap it up, I use 2 sheets of thick aluminium foil. You don't want thin stuff as it comes apart. It can break with the bones and get stuck on the meat as well, which I've had before in a competition, which isn't great. So we'll get some brown sugar down. Some people put butter in this at this time as well, but I find you don't need it, particularly with pork ribs, because these ones are particularly fatty, so we don't want to add too much more fat there because it's just not going to render down otherwise. Then some of our rub that we made earlier. And then we'll get our ribs out. So pop the ribs face down, so the bones are upright. Some more of the brown sugar, just on the back of it. And some more of that rub. Brown sugar's clumping up a bit. Alright, and then we'll get it wrapped up. Alright, so I'll pop that back into the Weber now. Get it closed back down. And let those keep cooking. Okay, so we've had these ribs on for about 5 hours now. So we'll just check the temperature. I have been out a few times since we wrapped it and just moved it around. But as you can see, we're getting really close. So 195, 200, these are getting really close to being done. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to get these unwrapped, get them glazed, and then we'll put them back into the smoker. Okay, so I've got these taken out of the Weber now, the ribs. I've just taken off one of the layers of alfoil and just made a boat out of the remaining stuff just to keep all the glaze inside. So what we're going to be using tonight, because I've got a fair bit of this stuff that needs to be used up, is Heavenly Hell Championship Candy. So we'll get some of this on. And brush it on evenly. And then pop this back into the Weber just to allow that glaze to set. Unfortunately, due to technical issues, my audio stopped working from here on in. So just to summarize what I did to prepare these ribs for this cook. First off, I used some pork baby back ribs and trimmed off the excess fat. Then applied mustard as a binder to allow rub to adhere to the ribs. Then I made a rub using ingredients most people would have in their pantry, and then followed up by cooking it in the Weber kettle using the snake method. As always, I used olive Pipco briquettes for the fuel and smoked the ribs using cherry and pecan woods from the Smoking Log Co. Then once the ribs reach 165 degrees Fahrenheit internal temperature, I wrapped them and continued to cook them until they reached 195 degrees Fahrenheit. Once at 195 Fahrenheit, I unwrapped and glazed the ribs using Heavenly Hell Championship Candy and cook for an additional 15 minutes just to allow that glaze to set. This will be the first in a series of Back to Basics cooks for those that are new to barbecue to showcase the flavor profiles you can create with ingredients that are easily accessible or in your pantry at home already. Now, as you can see from the footage, these ribs turned out absolutely amazing. Juicy, fall off the bone tender with a nice lick of smoke. If you've always wanted to have a crack at low and slow barbecue, I highly recommend giving this one a go. If you enjoyed this video and want to keep up to date with all my cooks, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Thanks once again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers!